All right, let's get right into it. Today, we're unpacking a highly complex geopolitical reality, one that fundamentally challenges pretty much everything we think we know about global maritime security and the actual limits of modern military reach. Now, the incredible insights and data we're breaking down today come straight from an extensive Wall Street Journal report, which was curated and featured over at sonophile.com. Massive credit to them for this resource material. We're going to look strictly at the facts on the ground and the strategic maneuvering happening in literally one of the most critical maritime corridors on the entire planet, the Strait of Hormuz. And look, if you're wondering why this matters to you directly, well, the device you're watching this on, the components powering your local energy grid, even the fuel in your car, they are all inextricably linked to the free flow of goods through these incredibly narrow, vulnerable oceanic choke points. What happens in these distant waters absolutely dictates the economic reality of your daily life. So it brings up a fascinating question. Can the world's most powerful navy actually force open a trade route? Take a second to really think about that. Because for centuries, dating way back to the height of the British Empire all the way through the modern American era, the fundamental assumption has basically been that naval supremacy automatically equals global market control. We just naturally tend to believe that if a superpower parks a multi-billion-dollar strike group in a contested waterway, international commerce is just going to flow right around it under this impenetrable protective umbrella. But, as the recent events in the Strait of Hormuz vividly demonstrate, the gap between the illusion of military control and the hard, unforgiving reality of global trade, it is incredibly wide.
Okay, let's dive into this. To really grasp this standoff, we're going to hit 5 key areas. First, the high-risk naval gamble initiated by Washington. Second, we'll contrast military tactics with commercial reality. Third, we'll look at the resulting global oil shock. Fourth, we'll define the absolute limits of military power. And finally, we'll reveal the ultimate decider in international maritime trade.
Starting off with Section 1, the high-risk naval gamble. This is where we really need to understand the immense geopolitical stakes involved when a country attempts to physically control a choke point that essentially powers the global economy. The whole catalyst for this current strategic stalemate was a military initiative known as Project Freedom. It was launched by former U.S. President Donald Trump, and it had a very specific, highly ambitious objective: breaking Iran's de facto control over the Strait of Hormuz and forcefully restoring freedom of navigation for commercial vessels. It was meant to be a massive, sweeping projection of power. However, and the report really highlights this, Trump ultimately decided to freeze the operation on a Wednesday, halting the immediate push. So what happens when a superpower suddenly hits the pause button on an operation of this sheer magnitude? Well, it leaves a vacuum. The underlying strategic conflict was left completely unresolved, setting the stage for an incredibly tense, high-stakes standoff right out there in the water. Journalist Jared Malson, in that Wall Street Journal report featured on sonophile.com, categorized this operation right from its inception as a high-risk gamble. And that specific phrasing, it's absolutely crucial. The operation faced major structural limitations from day one. Washington's whole goal was to pressure Iran into making strategic concessions by just flexing overwhelming naval superiority. But Tehran was equally determined to deny Washington any sort of clear political or military victory. It was an undeniably bold move by the U.S., for sure, but it relied heavily on one singular assumption: that applying maximum military pressure would automatically force the other side to back down or retreat. And as we're about to see, that assumption was deeply, deeply flawed. Because instead of backing down or, retreating to the negotiating table, Tehran responded with a determined, highly forceful, and rapid series of escalations. This wasn't just angry diplomatic rhetoric. We are talking about immediate kinetic action. Let's look at how this built up. The response included launching highly capable cruise missiles directly at American warships. That was then quickly followed by deploying sophisticated unmanned drones to constantly monitor and harass naval movements. And finally, they deployed these unpredictable swarms of fast attack boats. These heavily armed assets were directed against both military and civilian targets, basically making an undeniable statement that the strait was absolutely not going to be handed over uncontested. The direct result of those relentless escalations is what the report defines as a permanent threat environment. The entire waterway has been fundamentally transformed. It's no longer just some contested political boundary on a map. It has become physically and consistently hazardous. And we really need to emphasize what this actually means for a commercial entity. Look, for a military vessel, a threat is an occupational hazard. That's what they're built for. But for a massive commercial shipping conglomerate, even a 1% chance of a missile strike is mathematically the exact same thing as a totally closed route, simply because of the massive insurance liabilities involved. This permanent threat environment paralyzed the exact traffic it was originally meant to protect. Which brilliantly illustrates our next point, Section 2, Tactics versus Commercial Reality.
There is a severe, almost insurmountable disconnect here between military capability and commercial necessity. A Navy destroyer is fundamentally equipped to sit in a war zone. It uses defensive drones, it operates advanced mine detection arrays, and it has the structural capability to aggressively reroute under active enemy fire. But a commercial shipping CEO, they operate in an entirely different universe. They simply do not care about tactical advantages or how many advanced weapon systems are currently patrolling the water. If the risk of a single loitering munition hitting their tanker remains, the route is effectively dead to them. They require absolute, credible, long-term security guarantees before they will ever put their crews, their incredibly valuable cargo, and their multi-million-dollar ships in harm's way.
Now, the U.S. Navy has certainly tried to mitigate those risks through intense, continuous operations. Their specific tactical steps include physically rerouting any willing vessels through theoretically safer paths closer to the coast of Oman. They're deploying a massive fleet of unmanned maritime aircraft to provide constant 24/7 surveillance over the choke point. And they are actively running exhaustive, highly technical operations to detect and neutralize naval mines. But just consider the sheer logistical nightmare and the daily operational fatigue required to maintain this. These are highly advanced, incredibly expensive, continuous efforts attempting to artificially safeguard a route that remains under active, daily threat. Moving right along to Section 3, the global oil shock. Now we have to pivot from the tactical naval maneuvers to the immediate, devastating global economic consequences of this restricted passage. 130? Before this conflict really escalated, approximately 130 massive commercial vessels crossed the Strait of Hormuz every single day. To truly grasp the scale of that number, consider that this represents tens of millions of barrels of crude oil and a massive percentage of the world's liquefied natural gas, all squeezing through a geographical space only a few dozen miles wide. It is literally the lifeblood of the global industrial engine. And then that number just absolutely plummeted. From a robust 130 vessels crossing daily, it collapsed down to just a handful of ships even attempting the passage. This exposes a central, honestly brilliant conclusion from the report. Even if the American military operation succeeded on a tactical level, meaning it successfully kept those few moving ships from being physically sunk, it completely failed in its primary strategic goal. It completely failed to restore maritime traffic to pre-war levels. The military can secure the water all day long, but if the commercial ships simply refuse to enter the water in the first place, the strategy has failed. And this dramatic decline isn't just some localized logistics headache for shipping nerds. It is a profound economic earthquake. The virtual closure of the Strait of Hormuz triggered what the report describes as the worst oil supply shock in modern history. By significantly severing one of the primary arteries of global energy, this situation severely impacted energy markets worldwide. A geopolitical standoff in a narrow desert strait instantly translates to significantly higher costs at your local gas pump, and it inflates the cost of nearly every single item moving through global supply chains. It is the ultimate proof that local geography violently dictates global reality. Which brings us to Section 4, the limits of military power. Here, we clearly see Washington drifting toward a long-term naval confrontation without actually securing any decisive permanent results. Despite the advanced defensive shield provided by the U.S. Navy, the commercial operation faces massive, paralyzing obstacles. Primarily, Iran is actively demanding that any commercial vessels obtain prior authorization directly from them before even attempting a crossing. They are aggressively asserting their sovereign and administrative control over the waterway. This isn't just a physical military threat anymore. It's a concerted attempt to completely rewrite international maritime law and the foundational concept of free, unhindered navigation through sheer geographic leverage. So the crucial point is this exposes a stark geopolitical reality. Yes, American power is incredibly formidable. It possesses the most advanced lethal military pressure tools on the planet. But against the reality of a vital choke point, that power is simply not absolute. Deploying the most advanced military tools does not automatically translate to achieving the desired commercial outcome. Think of it like this. You can use a sword to fight an enemy combatant, right? But you absolutely cannot use a sword to force a merchant to open up their shop in the middle of an active war zone. The military can fight the war, but it cannot force a commercial trade route to function normally if the environment remains deeply contested. And that leads us to our final point, Section 5, the ultimate decider, trust. Now we're going to look past the missiles, the warships, and the tactical maneuvers to reveal the true currency of international trade. Control over the Strait of Hormuz cannot be secured through military force alone. Take a second to really process the weight of that. You can entirely dominate the regional airspace. You can sweep every single inch of the ocean floor for mines. But if the massive cargo ships do not sail, you do not control the trade route. Because normal functional maritime activity relies entirely on three foundational pillars. First, global markets, which require predictable, boring stability. Second, and honestly perhaps most importantly, insurance firms. If the highly specialized actuaries sitting in offices over in London calculate that the geopolitical risk is just too high, they will refuse to underwrite the hull or the cargo. And if they don't write the policy, the ship legally and financially cannot leave port. Period. And third, the international shipping sector itself, the corporate boards and labor unions responsible for the literal vessels and the human crews. These three entities are the ultimate deciders. Without their combined, absolute trust, the strait remains functionally closed, regardless of how many aircraft carriers are stationed nearby.
So the dramatic decline we've seen in shipping reflects a profound, systemic lack of market trust. It's not just the immediate, visceral fear of a missile strike happening today. It is a much wider, suffocating atmosphere of regional uncertainty. It's a deep, structural fear for global energy security. Fundamentally, there is a strict reluctance from commercial sectors to return without credible, ironclad, long-term security guarantees. Actually, think about it. A temporary naval escort operation is really just a short-term bandage on a massive geopolitical wound. Commercial markets require decades of predictable stability to function smoothly, and a heavily armed naval escort provides the exact opposite impression. It screams that things are not safe.
Which brings us to the profound central concluding thought from the source report. American power remains formidable, but it is not absolute. Project Freedom exposed a deep, uncomfortable reality about the modern world. Military might is an incredible tool, absolutely, but it is not a magic wand that can conjure commercial confidence out of thin air. When it comes to the vast interconnected web of global trade, human perception and corporate risk assessment will always inevitably override raw firepower. So, I want to leave you with this provocative thought. If the world's most powerful, technologically advanced navy cannot guarantee the flow of commerce through a critical, indispensable strait, what exactly is the future of global choke points? How is the modern globalized economy going to survive in an era where regional actors can effectively veto global maritime trade and traditional military might simply isn't enough to secure it?
And that wraps up our deep dive analysis today. A massive thank you again to Sonophile.com for the incredibly detailed source material and reporting that made this exact breakdown possible. If you found this clear, highly focused, and valuable to your understanding of global trade, do me a favor and make sure to hit that subscribe button right now. We have plenty of other geopolitical explainers on the channel that utilize this exact same structured format to help you master incredibly complex global topics quickly and efficiently. Check out our related videos, keep learning, and I will see you in the next one.